So sometimes I really surprise myself and find myself totally humbled when I see again how deeply conditioned I am. When I react strongly to a situation with so little mindfulness, even though I've been meditating faithfully, I still get knocked off my center. So I just want to share with you something that happened to me recently that brought this right back up to the forefront. I was on my first vacation in 2.5 years, and I had gone to Yosemite National Park, where I'd never been before. And, if you've been there and or seen pictures, there are awe-inspiring granite mountains. There are deep valleys. And at this time of year, there are a lot of rushing rivers. So we were staying in a small cottage that was nestled into a hillside, and just behind us was the sign for a hike. And each day, lots of cars parked by the roadside as people ventured on the trails that were behind us. So I had been told that the wildflowers were really beautiful. So one afternoon, as my husband read, I climbed the steep approach to the trail to begin the hike. And I love to hike, and I really relish my time alone in nature. So I was really looking forward to my afternoon. The trail opened up from the woods into the wide open. It traversed a steep green hillside about 300 feet above a rushing river. And the trail was about 2 feet wide. The view was really stunning and took my breath away. But so did this unexpected clenching in my body as I felt the unsureness and dizziness of my fear of heights. I had totally forgotten and was taken by surprise. In the past 2 years, I'd lived close to home during COVID, and although there were many challenges, I hadn't been challenged in this way. And it was kind of paralyzing. I went about 20 feet, and then there was this difficult corner that jutted out, and I couldn't get around it. The trail was too thin. The banks were too steep with nothing to hold on to steady myself. So I turned around. But the day was so beautiful that I wasn't willing to give up. And I tried again to begin. There were so many other people on this trail. There were elders. There were parents with kids in backpacks. There were people bringing their dogs on leashes. And I just thought, if they could do it with seeming ease, why couldn't I? But I couldn't. I still couldn't do it. In the moments as I walked back down from the trailhead, I found myself in what we sometimes call a hindrance stew. It was a cascading of aversive thoughts, one thought feeding on the next. I'm scared. I'm really disappointed. I'm ashamed that I can't do this. And why can't I relax and ground myself? All these thoughts were just magnifying this sense of self. And, I've heard it said that fear is the fuel for the ego, the fuel for this sense of self. And here it was. I was fueling that small sense of self with all these thoughts. And as my mind constricted, so did my body. And I don't know if you can sense that feeling of being trapped, but even as I talk about it, I can feel it again a little bit. In these kinds of moments, we tend to bring ourselves deep inside and isolate and separate as if this is protective. And, even now, as I look closely at my experience that afternoon, I realized that there was no object of fear outside of myself. The mountain trail wasn't fearful in itself. No one else was walking the trail experiencing that way. The fear was all internal. The fear and what was feared weren't different. And so that constriction, that sense of separating, was just separating me from myself. There is a place for fear in our lives. There's no question. It's necessary and it's healthy in a lot of circumstances. And sometimes the response is bigger than the situation warrants. It's overblown. And that was the kind of fear I was experiencing. Deeply rooted, conditioned from the past, powerful and painful. And this is suffering. I absolutely felt that. For me, it's heights. And for you, it might be something else. And I know why it arises. Many years of therapy have helped me with that. But really, the question now for me is how to work with it. How do I find ease even in the midst of it? So if you think about the messages that we hear culturally, and here are some quotes that I sometimes have in my own mind. Feel the fear and do it anyways. Go find fear and live there. Only when you're no longer afraid do you truly live. I actually just listened to a talk this week that was titled, How to Overcome and Conquer Our Fears. It sounds as if we're going to battle. And I think that we've all learned that going to battle doesn't work. We think it does. We wish it did. Everything around us tells us that this aggressive approach is motivating, and that by using it, we can tame our fear. But actually, it's really quite the opposite. It's compassion and it's kindness that can provide an atmosphere where fear can subside and we can open. And research is actually beginning to corroborate this. So I started the talk this morning by saying that I was surprised and humbled by this experience. I was humbled by the strength of the feelings and the amount of suffering. And this is the place where my heart was able to enter. In that feeling humbled, the ego just fell away a little, and there was some space for the heart and the pain that it felt. Finding an opening into the heart and allowing a little bit of softening, a little bit of metta and compassion, it makes all the difference. That separation that's felt in this constriction of our hearts and the mind just begin to melt. We begin to actually feel and care for our pain. Compassion for ourselves is the road back to connection within ourselves and really our own humanness. Turning towards the fear, that really is the warrior action, not in the resisting or fighting it, but in the willingness to let our hearts quiver with the pain of it. That's what lets us begin to accept it. I've spoken of a teacher that I sit with occasionally who is dying of ALS. And she uses a mantra in which she says, of course. And this mantra helps us accept ourselves where we are. Of course, we're afraid. And of course, we spin out when we feel pain. And of course, this is what's going on right now. Just that simple phrase, at least for me, it calms the turbulence that I can feel in my heart and mind that arises with fear. And then there's possibility. We see things more clearly, and maybe even the possibility of responding differently. It's allowed me to be curious and begin to actually play with my fears, to get to kind of try to know them a little bit more. So what I've been doing here at home is that I find easy places to practice. I go along bridges or on small hikes, and mindfully I get close enough to an edge to feel those dizzying feelings in a safe way and experiment. What does the feel, when does the fear arise? What does it feel like? What are those thoughts that begin kind of cascading in my mind? And then, how does kindness see it? How does compassion hold these old conditioned messages? Can compassion stay connected to those feelings of tightness? And for how long? All the while, I'm whispering to myself, of course, this is the way I feel. So as I play with it, the point isn't to overcome the fear, but to know it and care about it. And in all honesty, I kind of have this sense that I likely will never get over my fear of heights. I will likely experience the paralyzing lightheadedness every time I'm on an edge or a high place. And I might have to turn back. But the difference is that I'm learning that I don't have to abandon any part of myself in that place. I don't have to turn away from myself in shame. And I can practice staying connected to myself and to my fears. So I encourage you to be curious about these challenging places in you too. The places that are deeply rooted, highly reactive, and find doorways into your compassionate heart that can hold and care about your suffering and that keep you connected. Of course, we're not always going to get it right. But there are going to be countless opportunities to try again. And along the way, what I'm finding is that as a deeper compassion grows in myself, it also grows for others as well, because I can see and feel that this is part of our shared humanness. So thank you for your attention